I am hugely skeptical when it comes to India and China, with anyone saying anything at all about this is a big breakthrough. Oh, we've managed to do this. India has taught China a lesson. Oh, this has happened. I'm always very skeptical because nothing is ever as it seems when it comes to China. But when it comes to what Vikram Misri said, you've got to look at the context of when he said it. While we can sit here and cast doubts on whether China is going to hold its side of the bargain, etc. The truth of the matter is, India has basically spoken to China from a position of power. It's a position from which China is not used to being spoken to.
It's basically sort of, training them to forget what they've been trained for.
Yeah.
Right. And
very true. Whatever the next step is going to be in Eastern Ladakh, it can't be military. It can't be military. You've got two equal and opposing forces facing off against each other. War is unthinkable. In smart geopolitics, trust is not even a consideration. Why do we need to rebuild trust? Why do we need to rebuild something that is never going to be rebuilt? When people say, why should India just trust China, something at the back of my head is going, why should China trust India? Why should China trust India?
Hello and welcome. This is the 44th episode of NI Defense. Hi Shiv, how are you? Quite the week with lots happening on the world of defense
From all sides.
All sides, yeah. Canada still sort of, going on here and there. Right now, just our recalled envoy from Canada was giving an interview to the Press Trust of India. And he just kind of heard that before I walked in for the recording over here, and he kind of gave a lowdown of the last sort of 6-12 hours that he had to spend there. Yeah. But anyway, how's the week been for you?
Well, the week's been full of India-China, and I think that's what our episode this week is going to be about. We've been actually postponing India and China, but boy, did we get a news spec this time with that big handshake at Kazan in Russia. It's very mysterious story, actually, if you really ask me, because I think a lot of people are jumping to a lot of conclusions, but hopefully on this episode we'll decode some of that.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you said that, because I think the way I structured the notes of what we discussed, I think we were about to anyway go there, because I really can't make sense of what's exactly happened, if anything exactly has happened or not. But yeah, we will cover all those areas, and also we'll focus a lot on the military aspect of things, sticking true to our name and our defense of the Indian Army and the military's involvement in the negotiations, and what now will happen on the ground in the upcoming few months. But before we start, like a sort of a brief background for people. I mean, obviously people haven't, because China keeps coming up in headlines every few months. But still, for our listeners and viewers, sort of a very basic sort of an overview of what's happened over the last 4 years and why we are discussing, or what's led to us discussing, and what's led to the agreement that's kind of sparked the discussion again this week, is that around 4 years ago, China started not intruding per se, but building up large forces along the LAC. In response, India also started building up forces. There were some, clashes, verbal, some minor physical clashes here and there. But the biggest one was obviously the Galwan clash, the June 2020 Galwan clash that led to the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers, including one commanding officer. So Chinese soldiers died as well. China officially months later accepted 5 casualties, including one commanding officer. But the numbers are much, much higher, is what Indian military estimates have said. But we don't have the exact number. But we don't want to get into that. Since then, there's been a lot of, there's been some economic standoff. There have been no flights. The flights were kind of called off after COVID, but they never resumed, even though the pandemic went away. India went ahead and banned many Chinese apps, etc. And then, you had in our defense coming up at some point. So in season 1, Abhishek and I spoke a bit about China. And then in season 2, we've talked a lot about this. One interesting point that you've made almost every time we speak about this is that quite often in Indian media, you always have reporting of what China has been doing along the LAC, that China ne ye capture kar liya, China ne ye kar diya, China ne wahan deploy kar diya, China is stopping us from going there. But not much gets talked about when it comes to India's actions on the LAC. Something that I think Foreign Minister Jaishankar referred to when he spoke about the deal that happened this week, when he said that both forces have blocked patrolling for both the sides. Anyway, so PM Modi was supposed to he just finished his visit to Russia for the BRICS Summit in Kazan. Before that, the customary fair sort of press briefing that is held by the Foreign Secretary, where he lays out the agenda for the Prime Minister before any foreign visit was held, and that's where he dropped the bomb. No one was expecting this, by the way. It was supposed to be like, "Haan, BRICS mein kya
Yeah,
hoga?"
it was a surprise.
Yeah. But I think at some point the question was asked, because Xi Jinping would be that would they be meeting, and then he sort of dropped this bomb that, oh, by the way, we've reached an agreement with China to kind of go back to 2020 sort of agreements on patrolling, etc., etc. Since then, almost every geopolitical global expert has had a field day trying to interpret every word, every letter of the statements. You've had people putting the two statements side by side. The two statements after PM Modi and Xi Jinping did actually meet for a bilateral in Kazan, just trying to understand, oh, isne ye bola, usne ye nahi bola, what does this mean, what does that mean? So before we talk about the military aspect of things, the patrolling, before we talk about the Indian Army's deployment, how it will be impacted, whether it will be in the first place, I want your sense of how you've been reading this over the last 3 days, from the moment you had Vikram Misri breaking this announcement in the first place, ki haan, there's an agreement. Then I think a few hours later, you had Jaishankar at some event acknowledging it. Then you had the Chinese Foreign Ministry giving out a pithy statement, also saying, we've sort of reached some agreement. And then you had the bilateral happening in Kazan, and then you had both sides giving out statements. You've seen this unfold over 3 days, and I'm glad we're recording this exactly after everything is over, so we have the full picture of what's exactly happened as far as this week is concerned. Your sense of what's exactly happened?
I actually don't think we have the full picture yet, because we have the full picture of what we've seen in front of us. But I think 99% of this story is not for public consumption yet, and will probably reveal itself in the weeks and months ahead. Let's be very clear right off the bat, Dev, that when it comes to India and China, there are no I hate the word breakthrough, because there are no breakthroughs when it comes to India and China. Everything works at a glacial pace usually. But having with that sort of important disclaimer set aside, any forward movement as far as India and China is concerned is a big thing and should be welcomed, and is very plainly very good news. Now, Vikram Misri, when he, like you said, dropped the bombshell and said India and China had reached a resolution, most people who track this space, their antennae went up, because the word resolution, which many of us kind of throw around, has a very specific meaning in the foreign policy space. Yeah. When a diplomat, or when an IFS officer or foreign secretary uses the word resolution, there's a very procedural, technical aspect to it. It means that the two sides, after a degree of negotiation, have arrived at a converging point where they have agreed on certain points which they did not agree on before, and that they now have a plan of action in terms of how to execute and manifest that convergence in the form of a resolution. So resolution is not a woolly word when Vikram Misri says it. So when he used the word resolution, I was like, this means that something real has happened. Now, the reason why, a lot of people were very skeptical. I am hugely skeptical when it comes to India and China, with anyone saying anything at all about, oh, this is a big breakthrough. Oh, we've managed to do this. Oh, India has taught China a lesson. Oh, this has happened. I'm always very skeptical, because nothing is ever as it seems when it comes to China. But when it comes to what Vikram Misri said, you've got to look at the context of when he said it. He said it before BRICS. The obvious inference that most people made was the decks are being cleared for a Modi-Xi bilateral, which turned out to be right. And it didn't take rocket science for people to infer that, because it was obvious. Modi and Xi were there. China has been asking for this bilateral for a very long time. And it seemed like the obvious thing to do, create a mahal, a mood for that bilateral to happen by suggesting that there has been a resolution. But while that is true, Dev, the larger truth of the matter here, and what makes this bigger, and in my view, something that we should be congratulating the Indian Foreign Office and Diplomatic Corps about, is that for the last 2 years, since 2022, China has been consistently and repeatedly asking for a Modi-Xi bilateral at virtually every possible opportunity, including at the G20 last year. And we all know that Xi Jinping didn't attend the G20. And the singular reason for that was not because of scheduling reasons, not because of he's busy, not because he had better things to do, but because India said, come if you want to, but there's going to be no bilateral. So India has been consistently stubborn with China in a way that India has never been stubborn before. It's almost like a new India. We say Naya Bharat and New India and stuff, and throw those words around. Here is an example of that actually being true. You had an incredible amount of alignment between the Prime Minister's office, the Foreign Minister's office, the entire system, the NSA, etc., where they said not an inch, physically of course also, but not an inch of concession is going to be provided diplomatically to China, let alone agreeing to a bilateral, until there is not a woolly kind of concession by them saying, oh, chalo theek hai, let's talk peace. Okay, we'll try and we'll think about doing something to normalize relations. We need a resolution, and that's the reason why I'm saying that announcing a resolution is a big deal. We have every reason to be skeptical and frankly quite suspicious about the way things will go forward, because when it comes to China, they always talk through both sides of the mouth. We'll come to the factor of trust a little later, and I have a lot to say about the word trust. But the truth of the matter is, this is an achievement. And while we can sit here and cast doubts on whether China is going to hold its side of the bargain, etc., the truth of the matter is India has basically spoken to China from a position of power. It's a position from which China is not used to being spoken to. China's entire diplomatic experience has been speaking down to someone. Even with India, it's always been a question of speaking down to India. In this particular case, India drew a line in the sand and said, if you want to repair your global reputation by indulging in a bilateral with our leader, you have to demonstrate to us, and we are no Bambi in the woods, demonstrate to us that you are committed to a resolution to what is going to happen on the border in eastern Ladakh. We are two countries that have been in a war-like situation. There has been no fighting since 2022, but the massing of forces on the border means that both sides are basically combat ready for an escalation at any point of time, which is a terrible situation for both countries to be in. It's a dangerous situation for two nuclear countries to be in. And therefore, you have to demonstrate and commit to it formally in the form of a resolution that you are looking at a de-escalation, de-induction, etc. So hats off to the Indian government and to the Indian Foreign Office that they have agreed to it. They would not have agreed to it if there wasn't some commitment. What that commitment is, we don't know yet. The beauty of it is the Indian government is also being careful not to reveal too much about what has been committed by the Chinese side, because I think they want to give this a little bit of strategic space. They also want to give the Chinese a little bit of space to be able to for this entire resolution to play out, without too much of the kind of outrage and domestic political pressures and media questions and things to kind of cloud it a little too much. So I think that's the reason why it's still a little ambiguous about what the resolution is going to be about. We know what the shape of it is, but I think it's a very, very credible forward step for India.
Yeah. Right. So like you said, we'll circle back to the point of trust. I think that's something we'll kind of actually end the episode with. But I want to focus on two aspects majorly on this episode, both of which are linked to what is announced in this agreement. And the first one is the word patrolling. The first news reports that we carried, even including us on the website, based on Vikram Misri's first press conference before they departed for the BRICS Summit, the sort of headline theme we took was that both sides have agreed to resume patrolling. I want to understand what's this patrolling business, and I don't know how many people and how many readers and listeners think of it this way, but I'll ask you how I think of it, and then we can perhaps talk a bit more on this topic. Let me take the example of our correspondent Shivani Sharma. She was in Ladakh, I think yesterday and the day before, and I saw some of her broadcast. What I saw behind was like this very barren sort of landscape. It's very expansive, and it's very khali. And I just try to wonder कि यार यहाँ पे पेट्रोलिंग कहाँ करते हो, क्यों करते हो, कैसे करते हो? And you keep saying points like there's point number so and so, there's point number so and so, there's Demchok, there's Despang, there's planes, and there's whatever, and they have blocked this point, they have blocked that access route, and I'm trying to picture there कि यहाँ पे कहाँ पे blocking हो सकता है. So looking at the terrain from as someone who's sitting in Delhi, so many so many hundreds of kilometers away, give me a picture of what is this patrolling business all about on the ground over there.
So that's a great question, and believe me, a lot of people are very curious about what exactly patrolling looks like. Now, I want all of our viewers and listeners to just imagine the map of Eastern Ladakh. Doesn't need to be accurate. Just think of it as a frontier. Except that there, as we all know, there isn't one single line there. We call it the line of actual control. But the truth is that there are basically two lines over there. One is the line that is claimed to be the border by the Chinese, and one is claimed to be the border by the Indian side. Obviously, these two lines do not converge, and that's the reason why there is a border dispute. The Indian side say that the border is on the Chinese side. The Chinese side believe that border is on the Indian side, and that there is what is very politely called a difference of perception of that line. Considering how much blood has been spilt in that particular sector, calling it a difference of perception seems like a very, teddy bear touch to a truly terrible thing. But the fact is there is a difference of perception. Let's just go with that jargon. And as a result of this difference of perception, the border protocols and agreements between India and China have held that pending a solution to our border issue, pending a solution to this entire dispute, let's evolve a formula where both sides can patrol what is their perceived territory. Okay, and we will do it peacefully. The protocols are very, 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 very stringent and very strong. They basically say, because remember that this basically is the two sides agreeing to let the other side patrol till what their perception of the border is, which means a territory that they technically control, right? So it's a bit of a tum log idhar aao, hum log udhar jayenge, and we will agree to that kind of thing. So it's kind of risky, it's dangerous, which is why it is governed by a very strict protocol where there is a schedule of patrolling. There are conditions of how these patrols can happen. They need to be patrols of if I'm not mistaken, no more than 15 people. Sometimes vehicles can also be used like they are on many patrolling routes because the terrain is very forbidding. And when you say vehicles, these are usually like just all-terrain vehicles, no tanks and armored personnel carriers, no combat vehicles, just mobility vehicles, and no firearms of any kind. No firearms of any kind can be carried on these patrols. There is a schedule of patrolling that takes place where the Indian side informs the Chinese side before a patrol takes place, and the Chinese side informs the Indian side when their patrolling takes place. So this patrolling is basically taking place in that column of land between the two perception lines. That's where it happens. And that's the reason why in Shivani's frame that you saw, you can't see that because it was way, way behind her, behind that beautiful roll of mountains. Where Shivani was standing in that frame was somewhere near, I think, finger 2 or 3 of the Pangong Lake, where the scuffle between the Indian and Chinese soldiers happened in May 2020, actually triggering the entire standoff, was around finger 4. So that would be about 6 to 7 kilometers over the lake behind her, which would not be visible on her camera. But it's a good question you asked, because the lake banks, the banks of the lake that Shivani was reporting from, the Pangong Lake, which everybody knows about, is where patrolling actually happens. And patrolling happens with vehicles there as well. Now, the sharing of information about these patrols is very important because as much as possible, patrols shouldn't run into each other. There is a protocol. There is a protocol of how to handle each other when patrols run into each other. That there will be you will have a quick discussion. There will be no engagement whatsoever, and you will quickly retrace your steps. There will be absolutely no prospect of any escalation, and that's one of the reasons why firearms are prohibited during patrols. Sometimes patrols can become ill-tempered because, after all, you're soldiers. You're there literally guarding territory with your body, right? And 15 guys versus 15 guys is like a Gurugram like bar brawl, for God's sake. So you can imagine what it's like in Ladakh, right? The whole point of the exercise is to not cede any space, which is why patrols are scheduled in such a way that they don't cross each other as much as possible. Sometimes it can happen because of scheduling issues. Sometimes China may patrol when it is not supposed to patrol. Believe me, India does the same. It's not like someone's looking at an Excel sheet and saying, "Oh, acha, aaj nahi karna hai, so we can't go." It's not like that at all. They're holding on to. It's about territory, right? It's about land over there. So these patrols take place on a very regular basis, and patrols, therefore, Dev, are the only instrument through which each side is kind of keeping an eye on the territory that it claims as its own. So it's actually a very weird, paradoxical kind of mutual arrangement between the two sides, saying that, look, our dispute is not sorted out. We don't know when it's going to be sorted out. But until then, let's allow each other to keep an eye on the territory that we each other claim to be our own. So there's something very dangerous about it. But it works really well. It's worked since the 70s. The patrolling arrangement in Eastern Ladakh was evolved way after the 62 war. And it has worked perfectly well in Eastern Ladakh until 2020. There have been some scuffles. In 2017, there was a huge brawl. If you remember, that video went viral as well, between soldiers on the banks of the Pangong. Same place, Finger Point 4. In that place. The banks of the Pangong have there's something about that place that makes people very angry, I think, but because there have been lots of brawls over there. And so it just seems that it continues to be a mystery why everything went completely out of control in 2020. Even now, experts, government, army here in the country are unsure. Everybody has a theory. Okay, Article 370 happened and, there was COVID and the world was distracted. China would have wanted to, affect its territorial appetite, etc. But nobody has a clear-cut answer as to why things escalated from there. And the escalation happened entirely from the Chinese side. It wasn't like India did something, therefore, India ne ye kiya, isliye it happened. There was nothing like that at all. So that continues to be an unanswered question. But the resumption of patrolling means that an activity on the border between the two countries, which had fallen into a rhythm for 4 or 5 decades, and which had stood in very good stead in kind of keeping the quote-unquote peace on the border, is going to resume, is a very, very big thing. Now, where it's going to resume is going to be the key.
Yeah. And we don't know that.
Yeah, we don't know that.
And we won't know that for a while. And I don't think we will ever know the full dynamics of exactly where it'll resume. We will obviously have some reports coming here and there. Yeah. So, just to extend on that point, something that you mentioned that, these patrols at the end of the day are, soldiers. They've been trained to fight. And that's something that I was wondering when it came to this point of patrolling and all these so many agreements and protocols about how to behave and how to deal with, coming across the enemy patrol. It's basically sort of, training them to forget what they've been trained for.
Yeah.
Right. And
Very true. Yeah.
and you have so many moving parts. If you just look at the chain of command, what you said right now of what happened in 2020 remains a mystery. And that's something I want to just focus briefly. That even going forward, how difficult do you think it's going to be for both sides to ensure these protocols do get implemented? Because they come, imagine the way high up. You've had the two premiers of both the countries meeting. The agreements have been thrashed out by the topmost diplomats, including the National Security Advisor on the Indian side and his equivalent on the Chinese side. And these agreements are supposed to percolate down to right to the bottommost soldier. Something could go off at the patrol level. Something could happen between the patrol commanders. Something could happen between their respective senior officers who are sitting a bit away from the patrol, because that senior officer feels what happened yesterday was not cool. So, aaj, let's, go and, thoda ungli karte. Could be either side, by the way. His senior commander, you reach the corps level, you reach the division level, etc., so on and so forth. With so many people, especially on the military side involved, who've been trained to fight, how difficult has it been and how difficult will it be going forward to ensure this result?
Let's be very clear about one thing, Dev. What China did in May 2020, its escalation and the huge deployment of forces in eastern Ladakh was no military act. That was a direct order from the Chinese president that came directly from the top of the Chinese leadership. It was government. It was a government order. It was not some sector commander or theater commander or, battalion commander on the border who decided, let's escalate things, and then the rest of the military just fell in line and decided to it. It was a state commanded act that took place. So let's be very clear about one thing. When two leaders as big as Xi Jinping and Modi decide that there is going to be a new way of doing things, it is going to happen. Your question is a very, very good one and an important one because of how many moving parts there are in militaries and how quickly things can escalate, especially after 4 years of a warlike situation. And there will be some quibbles there, I'm sure. But when the two leaders decide, that handshake between Modi and Xi is more than just symbolic, because it is from their authority that flows a kind of a delta of commands through the bloodstream of the entire military on both sides, saying, we've shaken hands now. We've shaken hands now. It doesn't get bigger than me and Modi shaking hands now. And therefore, everything that's happened in the last 4 years has to change. Now, we can argue about whether Xi Jinping is actually going to be sending that message or not.
Yes.
But I'm saying the message of the handshake sends out a clear message down the military chain of command, right down to the final soldier on the ground, saying that the two leaders have met, the two leaders have broken bread, the two leaders have shaken hands. There's been a photo op. And of course, there will be, specific instructions. Not like the army will be left to understand what that symbolism means. There will be very clear and specific instructions of how things will be different, how things need to resume in terms of all the patrolling that you were talking about. But there's nothing clearer than government leadership demonstrating and radiating some kind of convergence of interest. And the reason why it's particularly important between India and China in the Eastern Ladakh context, because the last time the two sides disengaged anywhere in Eastern Ladakh was way back in, if I remember correctly, February or March in 2022. So it's been 2.5 years since there's been even an inch of forward movement between the two sides. So the two sides have spent nearly 3 years practically getting used to the fact that this issue is going nowhere.
Yep.
Nothing's going to happen with it. Now suddenly the two leaders have shaken hands because the military had by now it was clear to not just the Chinese military and the Indian military, but the world at large, that whatever the next step is going to be in Eastern Ladakh, it can't be military. It can't be military. You've got two equal and opposing forces facing off against each other. War is unthinkable because it will be a mutually destructive war. You're both nuclear countries. Kahan tak jaoge? What will you achieve by fighting? Because both sides are extremely powerful. The Indian army over 4 years has demonstrated to the Chinese that boss, you can't, ye nahi milne wala. You're not going to achieve what you're setting out to achieve. And that's, of course, another unsaid story that most people don't want to pay attention to. And therefore, I think that the real question now is the modalities, the anatomy of this resolution. What is it going to mean? Is there a timeline? Are there some phases? We can talk about those phases. I've tried to decode some of those things as well. But it's going to be complicated. It's going to be necessarily slow. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because nobody should be in a rush to do anything, most certainly for optics or visibility when it comes to India and China. It's too important an issue for there to be any kind of, stage management or event management as far as this is concerned.
Yeah, right. I'll talk about what we kind of briefly referred to right now about the military being involved in talks when it came to this issue, but for a quick break.
When you talk about this test match, what really happened? Is it just because Rohit Sharma read the pitch wrong and just one toss decision meant that you lost the test match? Even after that two fighting knocks of Sarfaraz Khan and Rishabh Pant.
No, that's actually a very important question.
Yeah.
Is it a one-off, this test, or are India losing more at home these days?
Yes, stats say they are. Because in last 1 year, you lost one to England in Hyderabad, and then you lost one to New Zealand in Bengaluru. Both under the captaincy of legendary PR captain.
Legendary what captain?
I will tell you why PR captain. Rohit Sharma is a great limited overs captain, if you ask me. Test captaincy, he has still yet to prove that he is up to the mark. Because his predecessor, Virat Kohli, what he did as a test captain, whatever Rohit Sharma does against Bangladesh will not matter, because he has to play New Zealand and then he has to go and play in Australia. If he performs well as a captain, if his team performs well in Australia when he is the captain, then I will go around and say, oh, Rohit Sharma is a good test captain.
So you will just react based on test matches?
No, you are not understanding what I am saying. I said in that podcast that yes, you did great against Bangladesh, but unless you win against Australia, you are not going to be a good captain. That is what I said. A certain senior journalist from Indian Express writes, after that Rohit Sharma press conference day one, okay, Rohit Sharma made a mistake. He comes out, he puts a brave face, I will agree to that, and he accepts that he made a mistake. And he tells the reporters, okay, talwar chalao. Fine, I understand.
No, I very well, I have to stop you here.
No, let me tell what I'm saying.
Go ahead, yeah.
And then somebody said, oh, Rohit Sharma's press conference, oh, come on. You are overhyping him over a press conference. The only Indian captain in last 40 years to lose 2 test matches in a single season in India.
We have to give credit to Rohit for what he
did.
For
losing a test match.
For losing a test match, yes.
On a pitch when it was raining the whole day and all night.
Of course.
Why you don't talk?
That is exactly what he acknowledged.
That is what he's doing. He has been doing. He loses. Oh, I made a mistake.
You made a mistake. Yeah, you made a mistake. You come and acknowledge it. You lost the test match. As simple as that.
Yeah.
Why is he getting criticized for that?
I am criticizing him for his performance.
Yeah.
And I am not criticizing him. I am criticizing the people who are doing his PR.
Exactly.
You understand what I am saying?
So, but then you said PR captain. So is Rohit paying them or what?
No, I am not saying that.
Then how is Rohit the PR captain?
Welcome back. Shiv and I are discussing one of the biggest developments when it comes to the ongoing India-China standoff for the last 4.5 years. I use the word ongoing, even though it may have seemed this week that things are, chalo, sab solve again, let's go back home and chill and all that. But, Shiv in the first half has kind of really explained that, that's not really exactly the case. Wait and watch on both sides, and we'll obviously talk a bit more on that. But before that, just a couple of points about the military's involvement when it came to negotiating where we've reached. One thing that struck me was whether it was Vikram Misri originally, whether it was the Ministry of External Affairs press release that came out I think a day later, whether it was Jai Shankar, whether it was as recently as Rajnath Singh right now today, defense minister, he gave a statement somewhere. Everybody, all the top leadership, they kept saying that this happened with talks between both diplomats and the military level. I think the last time we discussed India-China, I think a few weeks ago, you had said a very a telling point that the military is done talking now. All they can do now is fight. Now it's up to the hands of the diplomats. Yeah. In the 4 years that we've had this standoff, we've had 21 Corps Commander meetings. The last one, I think, if I'm not wrong, was in February. these meetings were very watched after the Galwan clash, because there was a lot of interest. So initially there was hope कि कुछ मिलेगा. Every meeting was like, हाँ, आज meeting हो रहा है, we'll wait till the statement comes out and we'll see what happens. Nothing usually used to come out. Slowly the interest died. I've seen the PIB releases get shorter and shorter and shorter. Yeah. It's like, they met, they talked, they agreed to talk again. That was really the crux of what the last release was of the February discussions. So like a very maybe sort of a maybe light-hearted point, but over the course, as even the military officers realize that these meetings aren't really going anywhere, it's actually the diplomats who end up solving it. Did they also become like a bit the meetings a bit light-hearted? Maybe the last 3-4 rounds where they just like kind of spoke about ki nothing has moved, everyone is in their places and there are no clashes, no face-offs, etc. And then went back happy. Or were there actual like still discussions going on that actually led up to what's happened this week?
Look, when it comes to the India-China border, the fact, and I've made this point multiple times, the very fact that an engagement is still on and the talks are still happening at the Corps Commander level is very good news. It means that two countries that are at war have a point of contact every few months where they are talking. Now, whether the talks are ill-tempered or hostile or light-hearted, all that is okay. That there's a great deal of posturing and drama that takes place from the Chinese side. There was one notorious meeting that happened, I think the 4th or the 5th meeting after the Galwan clash that happened, where there was where the Chinese side had people who were thumping the tables and dancing around and putting on this kind of threat display, as it were, because those are still the early days when they thought India could be browbeaten into some concessions as far as the border was concerned, and they learned a very bitter lesson after that, because India was like, what is this nautanki, man? We're here to talk, stop all this rubbish, leaving their lunch, saying we will not have lunch and walking off and things like that. Things became sober very, very fast because the Chinese realized that this is not the usual customer that they're used to. But let's be very clear about one thing. These are both very professional armies. These are both the Chinese side, in the context of what's happening in Ladakh, is the quote-unquote enemy or the adversary. But these are two well-trained professional fighting forces. Okay, and with a highly structured existence. They've got officers, they've got soldiers, and they carry out their duties very, very professionally. So these talks that take place in Chushul and Moldo, they are structured conversations. There is an exchange of information. Sometimes those talks have lasted like 12, 13 hours, as we've reported. Sometimes the shortest ones have been like 45 minutes, and when there's been nothing to say. But at no point have any of these discussions not been constructive. I don't think at any point the Corps commanders have said, look, now it's out of our hands and let the diplomats take care of it, because we've reached the end of what we can do. I don't think so, because that flow of information, just the symbolism of two armies positioned for war, extending their corps commanders in this small little hut in the Spangor Gap in the Chushul sector, having a conversation over a cup of tea. There's something very beautiful and paradoxical about it, because it basically means that your army is ready to destroy mine, my army is ready to destroy yours. But, for the moment, let's just sit across this table and shake hands and have a chat and exchange some information. Because neither of us is here of our own choice. We're here because our countries and our governments and our leaders, can't fix this. And until they can fix it themselves, let's at least try and keep the peace here. That's the idea of these talks. So I wouldn't ever for a moment belittle the idea of talks. Talks matter. Talks mean something. And I don't think that any of these talk rounds would have also been, had any kind of indifference in terms of, what's there to talk about kind of thing. Because these are senior officers. Yeah. They're senior officers. They've got data. They've got maps. They've got information and that kind of thing. But when Rajnath Singh says that the negotiations and the engagement has happened both at the diplomatic and military level, he's absolutely right, because look, it's the Foreign Office, the External Affairs Ministry cannot have negotiated the resolution that we're speaking about with the Chinese without the military involved. So that the chief of the army staff, the northern commander, the corps commander in Ladakh, all of them would have had to have been direct members of the conversation. If not, inputting on the conversation in real time, because ultimately the diplomats can talk, and they've done an incredible job in wresting some kind of a, concession from China. But it has also meant that the military needs to be involved, because ultimately what needs to be executed, what is going to flow from this resolution is all military. It's not going to happen at South Block. It's not going to happen on Raisina Hill. It's going to happen in Eastern Ladakh, in Galwan, in Hot Springs, in Gogra, in the Pangong, where they used to beat each other up. That's where it's going to manifest. Yeah. So the military has to be on board. So the conversations happening at the corps commander level would have most definitely flowed into those negotiations happening between the foreign offices and the President's office, Prime Minister's office on both sides.
Yeah. And in fact, I think those conversations will now be even in more focus, because I think what's going to happen over the next few weeks and months, it will purely be at the military level.
Absolutely.
With both watching what that military is doing in that space you spoke about. And we'll come to that in just a bit, about what the phases that you said before the break of what might happen in the next few weeks. But just one quick point on the Indian Army's deployment over the last 4 years. Now, obviously, it's here to stay. I don't mean the front line. The front line, once you have some sort of, like the agreement, resolution, once there is some sort of trust building, again, we'll come back to the trust point in a bit, trust building happening. The front line might be, both sides might come back a little, but the kind of infrastructure build-up that the Indian Army has done, Indian military generally has done along the LAC, the kind of posturing it has changed from, looking at just Pakistan to China in the last 4 years, that's obviously here to stay. You mentioned before the break of how over the course of these 4 years, the Indian military has shown China that you will not be able to dislodge us from here. There have been reports, some by you, of how there have been surprising takeovers of points and heights by the Indian army that kind of took the Chinese by surprise, and they had to kind of go back from what they were attempting to or planning to what India perceived their plan to be. So basically, the Indian army has shown the Chinese army that, we can match you toe-to-toe. We can go to battle toe-to-toe with you. How do you think that has happened? And when I say that, I don't mean the very broad-based picture of, we have a great political leader and there's political will and we are ready to show them, our might. Not just that. I'm talking more in terms of the military strategy, the tactics. Was this always war-gamed? Was the Indian army they had planned this many years ago that this might happen? Because obviously there have been failings, and that's something that we've discussed many times on this episode, on this podcast, with respect to the emergency purchases that we've had to make. So we were so not ready with enough, for example, winter clothing, winter tents, rifles. We had to make emergency purchases of rifles, stuff like that. So you had problems of not maybe enough equipment, but when it came to fighting on the ground, I don't mean the physical fighting, but you get my point. When it came to holding your place, defensive fighting, offensive, when it came to capturing a point to kind of show your enemy, I'm here. Where do you think the military has been able to succeed, and how do you think it has been able to succeed so well in the last 4 years?
So the fact that when we talk about the Indian and Chinese armies, the success of propaganda, the success of narrative building, the pressures of domestic politics highlighting one side instead of the other has always meant that the India-China fight in Eastern Ladakh seems like a lopsided one. That India is up against a stronger enemy, that the Chinese army is much more well-trained, more suited for this kind of warfare, and that the Indian army has been caught on the wrong foot and doesn't really know what to do and has been reactive. Let's be very clear about one thing, and this is a disclaimer before I tell you about the tactics that you asked about, Dev, which is that the Indian military was surprised by what happened. There was a systemic intelligence failure at the military intelligence and even at the political level as to what this was building up into. I think there was a sense of naivety and maybe even denial about what China's long-term intentions really are, and by which time it had become too big an issue. But I think the strength of Chinese narrative building has always meant that, you know, we belittle ourselves in this country. You know, we look at ourselves through a diminishing prism in this country. And believe me, you know me, I do not say anything, through a kind of nationalistic voice. But the Indian Army is an absolutely top-class land force. And it is a force that has spent generations of battles at those high altitudes. So, when the Chinese decided to try and catch the Indian Army off the wrong foot, they literally messed with the wrong guy. Okay, and I am, there is no chest thumping going on when I'm saying this. So when it comes to tactics, the manner in which a large part of mainstream media spotlighting has painted the India-China story in Ladakh has made it look like the Chinese aggressors have come and the Indian army was like sitting ducks and they were on the back foot and they were thrashed and they were imprisoned. And then you've seen the pictures selectively released by the Chinese, and they are past masters at that kind of thing, narrative building. And the truth is always something else entirely. The fact is, let me be very clear about this, and I don't think I can be more clear about this, Dev. China would not be talking about a resolution if it was not in a position of weakness in some form or the other. Okay? When you talk about how the Chinese have conducted incursions, the Chinese have captured so much territory, the Chinese are dominating this particular height, the Chinese have come itna andar and they've sat there. Does anyone ever stop to think why you never hear about India doing the same thing? Does it mean India is not doing the same thing? Does it mean that maybe the Indian army is just not talking about it? Does it mean that it strategically suits India to, not project to the world that it is an aggressor with territorial ambitions? Remember, India always never fails to remind the world that we have no territorial ambitions on anybody else's country. We are a peaceful country doing our work. But the army on the ground is showing aggressors exactly what it means to mess with the Indian army. It does. And again, there's nothing romantic about what I'm saying, because this is a dangerous and terrible business at the end of the day, because these are young men, commanding officers, majors, lieutenant colonels, doing really, really dangerous work. They're going into Chinese territory. They're holding ground. They're sending single view pictures back to their commanding officers so that there's no record of those pictures over there. They're making video calls. I have seen evidence, Dev. I have seen evidence of Indian guys holding ground on the Chinese side and showing them that if you block that patrol of ours 11.5 kilometers north from here, we will not let you come here. There's a thing called quid pro quo operations, which is very typical of Ladakh, which is that if you do something, I will do the same thing to you somewhere else. You're not allowing my people to patrol normally in this thing called the Y junction in Depsang. You can forget about your guys patrolling in Demchok, which is the other end of Ladakh, like hundreds of kilometers apart. They're doing exactly the same thing, but one side is doing it to the other. So there's an elegance about what is going on, and I hate to use that word for such a terrible business, but there's an elegant sort of structural elegance to what is happening. And believe me, think about it like this. The stability of what's happened, the reason why things have not escalated into a war is because both sides are locked. When we use the word stalemate, they're locked. China has India by the throat in some areas. India's got China by the throat in some areas, and it kind of cancels. They cancel each other out. So when it comes to tactics, when it comes to India using its special forces, when it comes to India, doing very much the same things that the Chinese have done, let me confirm. Let me erase all doubts for everyone thinking that no, India does not do those things. India will fight honorably. And let's not use words like honor and stuff over here. It's not like that. These are tactics on the ground, decisions taken by brave commanding officers. And we do exactly to the Chinese what they've done to us. That's the reason why we're talking to them. That's the reason why we've arrived at this resolution.
Yeah. Lovely. And this sort of paints a very weird picture of a war. I mean, I never imagined war to be like this, where it's, you are just like taking points and blocking somebody from patrolling somewhere instead of using your actual guns. But I'm glad we're not using guns and tanks and missiles and, even worse weaponry. Right. So what's going to happen over the next few weeks? At the end of the BRICS Summit, Vikram Misri, again, a traditional press conference was held where he spoke about the bilateral between PM Modi and Xi. He was asked this question by actually our correspondent, Gaurav Sawant, whether the soldiers will spend the upcoming winter in the cold as well. I think the answer to that is, I think so, yes, probably. But he gave an answer by saying that he'll defer that question to the military leaders and, they are best the ones. I loved his answer. They have spoken like a true diplomat. Like, I'll defer the question to the military leaders and they are the best ones to dwell on this matter. Something on these lines. But anyway, I think obviously it won't happen as soon as this winter because we still don't know, and even we can't even hazard guesses into what exactly might happen when it comes to patrolling resuming, or when it might even resume in the first place. Your sense of what you've seen over the last 3 days, you've seen over the last 4 years, your historical understanding of how India-China operate and how their militaries operate. How do you see this agreement taking shape on the ground?
See, I think it's actually a good thing, and it's a little bit of a serendipity that this resolution has been achieved right before winter. Yeah. Because in winter, anyway, activity is significantly lowered. Even when patrolling used to happen, patrolling would be much less in winter because of obvious reasons. It goes to minus 40 degrees in some of those sectors. It's absolutely unthinkably cold. And the blizzard situations in many of those sectors mean that mobility is very, very difficult. So you're right that things are not going to happen overnight. They might not even happen over the next few weeks or months, because that's a good thing. And let me explain why that's a good thing. When you've got, what is in effect 4 or 5 divisions worth of soldiers on both sides, collectively massed against each other across a huge frontage in eastern Ladakh, moving them is going to have to be in phases. You can't do it overnight because, and we'll come to trust right at the end. Remind me about that, Dev. But the fact is, it has to happen in a slow and deliberate manner, in coordination with each other. Now, remember that the militaries will be talking to each other, but the Indian and Chinese working mechanism for coordination, the WMCC, will also be meeting. They've had lots of meetings. They will continue those meetings to define the rules of engagement and the rules of disengagement, rather. So, the very important to understand, because a lot of viewers and listeners think that the words disengagement, de-escalation and de-induction are interchangeable and they kind of mean the same thing. They do not. All three have very, very specific meanings, and I will just quickly define what they means. Just picture what it looks like in one particular sector. Let's take the last sector where disengagement happened, which was the Gogra hot springs in south central Ladakh, east central Ladakh, I beg your pardon. Here you've had soldiers on both sides in large numbers in a frontage where they are separated by, in some places, as little as 25 to 30 meters. Anywhere between 100, 200 meters to 25, 30 meters. That is the kind of incredibly small distance between soldiers on both sides, which means it is a very, very volatile warlike situation, especially there. Now, disengagement has already happened there. What does disengagement mean? Disengagement is the bare minimum that takes place when you're moving towards normalization. Disengagement basically means that both sides have decided that they will pull their troops back. The troops who are manning the absolute frontline posts with their weapons, they will be pulled back in such a way that there is suddenly a kind of no man's land created between both sides, which means that there is a safety margin between two sides. And even if an escalation were to happen, both sides would have time to de-escalate because there's not much distance. There's a lot of distance between them. 25 to 30 meters is a pistol firing distance. But if you put it to 3-4 kilometers, then there's still some time for commanders to cool things down if there is an escalation somewhere else. So that's what disengagement means. You disengage the troops from being able to engage, right? That's disengagement. That's the easy part. That's the part that can happen overnight. No big deal. It usually takes 2 or 3 days for disengagement to happen. Now comes the more important next step, which is de-escalation. Now, de-escalation means, now remember, when you've got troops massed along the front line, you've disengaged them and moved them back. But behind those troops, maybe 300 to 400 meters or more behind them, a few kilometers behind them, you've got support troops, you've got support equipment, and you've got the war stores, the firepower, the real firepower of war, all parked there. You've got artillery, you've got tanks, you've got surface-to-air missiles, you've got radars, you've got air defense weaponry, you've got armored personnel carriers, you've got fuel depots, that kind of thing. The machines of war, as it were. The humans you've disengaged. Now you need to move back the machines of war. So those are things that lie about 3 to 4 kilometers back from the frontage. So de-escalation means moving those things away to a much larger distance back from the frontage, which basically means you're bringing temperatures down. You've moved the fighting men, the foot soldiers back, which means they can't fight. Now you're moving the equipment back, which means that the possibility of the usage of missiles, guns, artillery, and things like that goes down by a huge quantity, because it means you're giving each side the time to say that if there's an escalation, I have to move all these things forward again, and only then the war can start. And that will take maybe a few days or a few hours. And when it comes to war, hours and days are the difference between war breaking out and not breaking out. It's basically giving both sides a margin, a safety margin, so that the higher ups have time to calm things down. That's all this is really. But the most challenging third phase, Dev, is de-induction. De-induction sounds very innocuous, but it's actually the most challenging part of it, because it means that troops who were especially deployed in this area, troops and equipment that was specially brought in from elsewhere, in other sectors, other theaters of China or India, in India's case, Jammu and other places, they can return. They can be moved out of the Ladakh theater entirely and go back to where they came from. Which means that Ladakh and the Chinese side returns to a pre-2020 kind of normal. Now, this doesn't mean that there is no military presence there at all. Obviously, it will mean that post-May 2020, neither side is going to say that we're going to remove everything. No side will agree to that. There will obviously be a new normal. There will be an increased presence there. But it won't be this kind of double division kind of strength. That's what de-induction is going to be. That, in my view, is going to be the most challenging. Disengagement and de-escalation, moving back of troops and firepower are logistical. That's not going to be such a big deal. But the larger issue of de-induction, possible dismantling of infrastructure that supports the presence of troops in those areas. China's been doing a lot more of it than India has, but India has also been doing it. Those are going to be the big challenges. But if you look at it in terms of a timeline, I think this is the kind of phase. These are the 3 phases that will need to be gone through.
Right. But then that brings us to the very, very crucial question of trust.
Yeah.
And that question has been asked a lot this week. In fact, to also all the leaders, to Vikram Misri, Foreign Secretary, to Jaishankar, Foreign Minister, they haven't really given answers on that. Obviously, don't blame them. If my information isn't wrong, and this would be quite ironical, PM Modi and Xi met in October 2019 in Mahabalipuram. This was at a time when China was, making some noises about the abrogation of Article 370, and this sort of summit was seen like, okay, cool, they've met, again, handshake, stuff is cool between the two. Galwan happened literally the next year. The massing of troops by China happened a few weeks before that. You said at the beginning of this episode towards the middle of this episode, that what happened in 2020 with China sort of, increasing its troop presence along the LSE was a very political decision, and it has to have come from the leadership of China. So I'm not sure if it was planned when Xi was meeting PM Modi, but I'm guessing with stuff like military, it has to be planned a few months in advance. So obviously this was going on when he was meeting PM Modi. Now, I'm not saying that he has some sinister motive and when he met PM Modi in Russia, but then how do I know? Because what happened then in 2020, right?
Yeah.
So how are India and China ever going to bridge this divide, whether at the political level or even more crucially at the military level? Because what you've described right now, me bringing back my troops by so many kilometers, is on the assumption and the faith that even you are doing that.
Yeah.
If I pull back 6 kilometers and you pull back only 1 kilometer, and you can reach that point in 5 minutes and I can reach it in maybe 1 hour, then bro, that's bad for me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take all the precaution I can to ensure that, it's really happening. So how do you get around doing that?
See, the good news is I think trust is a highly overrated virtue. And some of the finest experts in the world believe, and I agree with them, that in smart geopolitics, trust is not even a consideration. Using trust to bridge gaps between countries is unsustainable, unreliable, and will never allow you to sleep at night. In Singapore, the government there doesn't trust that people will not litter. It imposes, the absolute assurance of a terrible fine on them in order for them to comply with that. And the Singaporean people do that. And I love that example because most people make a big deal out of how it's in Singaporean culture to be clean and not litter. It's not that. It's naked fear of jail and, losing a lot of money that, makes it part of your culture. So the reason I take that example is because India doesn't need to trust China. We've heard the army chief, we've heard many diplomats and experts say, oh, trust is a problem. Oh, we need to rebuild trust. Oh, but trust is an issue. Trust deficit to bahut zyada hai. And I frankly kind of balk at that because I think, why do we need to rebuild trust? Why do we need to rebuild something that is never going to be rebuilt? China has been a treacherous state since time immemorial, and especially in the context of India. And I don't mean this with any malice. I mean, as a country that works unarguably with self-interest, it does not put a high premium on being honorable as far as trust is concerned. It works and functions only based on self-interest and an aggressive self-interest. And if its enemies put a high value and premium on trust, then that's their problem. That's how China sees it. 1962 war, 2020, Galwan, all of them are live examples of either our lifetime or the last century where trust has blown up in your face in this country. So now, if the lack of trust between India and China was an absolutely essential ingredient to moving forward, then I would have been a very worried person right now. But I'm actually comfortable with the lack of trust because I believe that the glue to the two countries being held together is not something as wishy-washy and kind of unstructured as trust. Ultimately, what is trust? When people say why should India just trust China, something at the back of my head is going, why should China trust India? Why should China trust India? And I mean it. As an Indian, I'm saying, why should China trust India? Because we are also an ancient civilization. Because we've been very honorable in our commitments, which we have. India's track record compared to China there's no comparison in terms of India's commitment to protocols, India's adherence to international regulations. There's no comparison. India has always been an extremely trustworthy, reliable, force, no matter what, even to its adversaries, even to Pakistan, even to China. But when you're at war, when you're competing for regional hegemony and influence, why would you trust the next guy? Yep. Your dynamic with that country, and this brings me to the fact that the dynamic between India and China needs to be what I call mutually strategic dissuasion, which basically means that it is in my interest not to mess with you because I know what's going to happen. And it's in China's interest not to mess with me because they know what will happen. And there lies the peace. There lies the military equilibrium. There lies the whole delta of each side not messing with the other. Okay? And stability comes from that. If there is a mutual understanding that, boss, it is going to serve nothing at all if my military goes against yours or yours against mine because we are both equally powerful. Brilliant. I don't need to trust you. I don't have to trust that you will do something devious because you know what will happen if you try anything. So forget trust. Trust is a non-essential ingredient in this entire thing. But confidence building measures will have to be there. You made a very important point of how do we know that they're going to keep their end of the bargain and actually de-escalate and disengage? How do we know that's going to happen? Again, trust does not even enter the picture here. All of these things have to be corroborated through satellite pictures, intelligence, verifiable and agreed modalities of proof. Again, India is not like, acha, you promise you've done it? Promise you've moved the troops back? Oh, okay, then now we can move to the next point. It's not happening like that. India's got satellites, India's got intelligence, India's got planes to conduct its own verification. So we should actually be really happy that trust is not a sticking point between the two countries. Of course, trust is a desirable. But believe me when I say that trust can't be that first step. Our focus right now can't be on trust because it is too incoherent entity or a quantity to actually be able to put too many resources into going after. Put your resources into creating strength on the ground, creating those protocols for the resumption of your patrolling in Demchok and Depsang. Put resources into what the new rules of engagement are going to be for those patrols. From that will flow the stability and the peace. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I don't trust you and you don't trust me. And when trust ceases to matter, the two countries move to an entirely higher plane. And then maybe trust will actually evolve. Not in our lifetime, but maybe, in the future generations, the stability between India and China has reached such an extent that trust has become part of the culture. It's highly possible. The statement made by Xi Jinping, most people think of these statements made at these bilaterals as हाँ किसी ने ऐसे ही लिख दिया. But if you look at each of the words and the things that he uses, and I'm granting this is a country that is very conniving, very sly, plays mind games. Two ancient civilizations, convergence of cultures, the acknowledgement of, looking at the historical trends, working together. Let's discount everything that's going on in Xi's mind right now. But I'm saying those are important words. It provides a glimpse into the mind of the Chinese as to where they are approaching this from. And it's not from a position of saying, hey, let's trust each other. It is out of, I think, a sudden dawn of respect, an acknowledgement of having underestimated India, most definitely an acknowledgement of having underestimated the Indian army and the Indian military at large, and therefore saying, okay, now let's talk. That's what this is. Strength only respects strength when it comes to China.
Yeah. Fantastic point there. And I love the part where you talked about how China does not really give a damn about trust, stuff like trust. And you don't say that with a lot of malice, because that kind of brought to memory that, the other example, like when you said when it comes to these military meetings and they're oftentimes very rude, obnoxious, etc. People would look at that and say, but that's not an honorable thing to do. But then that's not part of their culture. I mean, that's perhaps the way they've been taught how to negotiate, right? And that's something... if you read books by, for example, Shiv Menon, this is what they talk about. When it comes to negotiating, this is part of the culture. This is how they've been taught how to negotiate. And you better learn that and respond accordingly then, which I'm guessing is what India has learned to do in the last 4 years and more. Right. I think that's a good point to end this episode. But one last final thought. This is to go back to what sort of started all of this, the current crisis, the Galwan clash. Now we know China was building up forces because the core commander meetings, I think, if I'm not wrong, started happening even before the Galwan clash happened. And the clash actually happened over some of the verification of something that had been agreed to at one of the core commander meetings. The Indian side had gone to verify that Chinese had pulled away some tents. They had not. And then that physical fighting happened over the entire night that led to so many deaths. I've always wondered, if you look at just the Galwan clash, did China actually want that clash to happen, or was that also sort of something that went out of control on their end? Because what we know, what they were planning was to amass like this hordes of troops along the LAC and then just see what India would do, and I'm guessing that would lead to some sort of standoff. But the reason I ask this is that the standoff would not have been in so much news. There would not have been so much world headlines, world pressure if so many deaths had not happened on the LAC. But they happened, unfortunately. When that stone was pelted towards Colonel Santosh Babu, was it just in the heat of the moment something went wrong, or was that clash a part of the larger Chinese plan to provoke something on the border?
I'm sure there was a plan to provoke. Like I said, when state policy has basically resulted in this huge and unusual deployment, very threatening deployment of Chinese forces in eastern Ladakh, across the border, then nothing that happens on the ground is really something that's confined to a small unit level escalation. Like you rightly pointed out, the fact that this escalation in Galwan took place very shortly after a very considered core commander level talk where things had been clearly decided. What the Indian side had gone to inspect was something that had been clearly agreed upon by the Chinese. Again, we return to the idea of trust and treachery. They had agreed to remove their tents and observation post from the river bend of the Galwan Valley. And when the Indian side had gone there to inspect it, they were in a most unprovoked manner attacked by a lowly soldier, like a very junior soldier. I hate to use the word lowly for a soldier. A junior soldier attacking a commanding officer and pushing him could not have been a localized kind of flare up. Obviously, there was a design, and there are other indications to prove that Galwan was not not an accidental flare up between those two units, because the unit and I've written about this in my book as well. The unit that suddenly was in Galwan from the Chinese side were all outsiders, apart from the few troops, including the commanding officer, the interpreter, etc., who were right on the front line. The support troops over that week had suddenly changed. The actual unit that was based there was pulled back, and a different unit, which in my account has been listed as a almost like a kind of special forces, a much more equipped, much more well-trained unit was placed over there very suspiciously. Those things don't happen because on the frontage between India and China and Ladakh, any such movements, any troop rotations, any changes, naya unit aa raha hai, these are all notified, and these are things are exchanged between commanding officers on a daily level. Because that's where the trust comes at the tactical level. You're exchanging information, baatcheet ho rahi hai, and like we've discussed before, there's even friendship between troops and commanding officers at the border, because they're like, there's no fighting happening, we just chill here, you have to be there, we have to be here, we're okay with each other. And therefore that escalation stood out like a sore thumb. It was unexplainable. It happened because someone had said, we need an escalation here. We need an opportunity to do something. It went out of their hands. It completely backfired because it was a terrible loss for India. 20 people, including a commanding officer, died. Their commanding officer also died. They've not accepted to anything more than 5 people being killed, but we do know that number was much larger. But that's a distasteful topic, talking about bodies. But it was the first indication that China had that, okay, this is not going the way we wanted. The Galwan escalation was supposed to be a quick, lightning fast, hot-tempered little clash. We're going to lose some people on both sides, and we'll hold our ground and we'll move in a little bit and create those facts over there. And then uske baad baatcheet hogi. We'll move in a couple of kilometers and say, nahin, this is our line. And then we'll maybe replicate it in other places and hopefully the Indian army will just, fold like a pack of cards. It didn't happen, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Right. So lots to watch on this topic. I mean, it's kind of over to the military now because the talking has happened. Like you said, the diplomats have spoken, the leaders have spoken at the level that you had previously said it would have to happen for some forward movement on this standoff, and that's happened. And now what happens on the ground at the military level is what will define what happens in the standoff going forward. And obviously we'll keep a close eye on this podcast, and we'll come back to this topic whenever there's something substantial to discuss. Thanks, Shiv. Amazing insights on this episode as always. Loved this conversation, and thanks to our producer Anna Priyadarshini, and thanks again to all our listeners and viewers. Your comments just keep motivating us to talk about all the subjects of defense. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with a passport. Bye bye.